A cowboy tore a young native woman from the coils of a monstrous serpent. By the following day, she whispered that fate itself had placed her in his path. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The scream that had shattered the desert stillness would echo in Eli Boone's mind until his dying breath. Not for its horror, but for what it revealed about destiny. 3 miles outside of Tombstone, Arizona territory, 1879. The sun blazed mercilessly, turning red stone into fire and brittle brush into ash. Eli had been trailing a wounded mustang for hours, following a trail of blood shining like rubies in the sand. His bay mare, Copper, stepped carefully between scattered boulders, ears twitching at the strange echoes rolling through the canyon. That's when the scream ripped through the air. Eli jerked back on the reins, his scarred hand drifting instinctively to the Colt .45 on his hip. Copper snorted, pawing at the hard earth, her iron shoes scraping sparks from stone. The cry had come from up ahead, past a stand of towering saguaros that loomed like sentinels beneath the burning sky. He'd heard countless sounds in his 30 years, the rattled gasps of soldiers dying in war, the last breath of cattle in winter, storms, the howls of coyotes calling to their pack. But this sound was different. Human, yes, but carrying something primal that made his skin crawl. Eli slid from the saddle, his boots crunching on the sand. He tied Copper to a mesquite bush and drew his revolver, spinning the cylinder with practiced calm. 6 shots, always 6. 5 was never enough, and 7 belonged to dreamers. The canyon walls rose around him like the ribs of a buried giant. Wind and rain had carved their red faces smooth shadows, sinking deep into the cracks where God alone knew what might be hiding. His spurs whispered with each step, a metallic jingle that sounded too loud in the silence. Then came another noise, worse than the scream, a steady scraping like rawhide dragged over stone. Ilame had heard such a sound once before, when a diamondback thick as his arm crossed his path. But this was heavier, larger. He rounded a boulder the size of a wagon and stopped cold. 20 yards away, coiled around a young woman like a nightmare made flesh, was the biggest snake he had ever laid eyes on. Its body was thick as a man's chest, copper scales flashing in the sun. The head, broad as a dinner plate, rose above her with lantern-yellow eyes and fangs that hooked like ivory knives. The woman, no older than 20, had hair black as midnight spilling across the sand. Her deerskin dress hung in tatters, bearing glimpses of bronze skin painted with tattoos that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her eyes, dark and wide, held terror, yet no surrender, and locked on Eli's. She did not scream again. Instead, her lips shaped a single word he somehow understood. The coils crushed tighter around her chest, and Eli saw the strain in her face as she fought for breath. The serpent's head swayed, tongue flicking the air, testing him. It knew he was there, deciding if he was threat or another meal. Eli raised the Colt sighting down the barrel. The distance was fair, 25 yards, but the head bobbed constantly, and the woman lay trapped behind it. One wrong shot, and she was dead. The snake's gaze met his, those alien eyes, cold, ancient, merciless. This was no ordinary beast born of hunger. This was something older. It flowed across the sand, dragging the woman with it, her bare feet carving trenches as her lips turned blue. 10 seconds, maybe less, before it struck. He could run. Hell, he should run. The woman was already lost, but as her eyes met his again, something passed between them. A plea, a vow. Eli slid the gun back into its holster. The snake hesitated, puzzled by the move. Eli snatched up a sun-bleached branch from a palo verde. It was little more than a stick, but it was all he had. The creature advanced, the hiss rolling from deep inside its chest like thunder, the sound of ancient fury. It reared back, head rising 8 feet high, mouth yawning wide, venom dripping from fangs, the stench of death striking Eli like a blow. He threw himself sideways as the jaws snapped shut where his skull had been. The serpent's weight carried forward, loosening its grip. The woman gasped a ragged breath, and Eli swung with every ounce of strength he had, the branch crashing down just behind its skull. Shock rattled his arms. The monster shrieked, half roar, half scream. It released her at once, turning all its hatred toward him. The young woman tumbled free of the serpent's coils, clutching her ribs as she dragged in ragged breaths. Her dress hung in shreds, red welts burning across her skin where the beast had crushed her. Yet she lived, her eyes sharp, locked in focus. The snake lashed out again, quicker than anything that massive should have been. Eli Boone threw himself back, feeling the hot gust of its strike whip past his hair. His boots slipped in the loose sand, and he hit the ground hard. The branch flew from his grasp, landing several feet away. Now the creature loomed above him, those lantern-yellow eyes staring down with what looked like cruel satisfaction. Drops of venom fell from its fangs onto his chest, searing holes through cloth like acid. Up close, every scale glimmered with terrifying perfection. Eli shut his eyes, bracing for the end. But instead came a sound that didn't belong, the whisper of bare feet racing across the sand. Then a voice rose, strange yet familiar words he couldn't place, but somehow understood. The tone carried authority, old and commanding, vibrating through the canyon air. When Eli looked, the young woman stood between him and the monster. Arms lifted high. Her tattoos shimmered, glowing with a light of their own shadows dancing across the stone walls. The snake froze, swaying its head as though trapped in an unseen current. Her voice climbed stronger, demanding undeniable. Slowly, the beast began to retreat, coils sliding over the sand with grudging reluctance. For an instant, Eli swore he saw recognition in its eyes, predator and human, bound by some ancient pact. Then it turned, gliding back into the desert shadows, until only the deep grooves it left in the sand proved it had ever been there. The woman staggered, and Eli leapt to steady her. Her skin burned with fever under his hands, tremors rippling through her body like aftershocks. "You saved my life," she breathed in accented English, her dark gaze locking onto his. "But maybe I was meant to save yours." Before he could ask, she collapsed in his arms unconscious. He lifted her easily, surprised by her lightness, and carried her to Copper, waiting patiently in the mesquite's shade. The mare whinnied softly, as though expecting them both. Eli set the woman across the saddle and mounted behind her, her head against his chest. Her breath shallow, but steady. She murmured in her native tongue now and then, words carrying weight beyond sound. Eli had come to Arizona 3 years earlier, fleeing the war's ghosts and chasing a new beginning. Ranch work, guiding Easterners through the frontier. It was honest, though never rich. It kept him on the move, always running from the past. But holding this mysterious woman, feeling her heartbeat against his ribs, Eli wondered if the road ahead might finally mean staying. By sundown, they reached Tombstone, the sky aflame in crimson and gold. The town sprawled like a child's toy, set adobe and timber rising from the desert's edge. Eli led Copper down the main street, past the Oriental saloon Laughter and Piano, spilling into the dusk. A few heads turned at the sight of them, but most looked away. In a town where fortunes rose and fell on the shuffle of cards, and men died for pocket change, one more enigma drew little notice. The doctor's office sat wedged between a barber and a general store. Eli had walked through its door before, after a bad throw from a bronc. The man inside was steady-handed, if not always sober. He tied Copper to the post, lifted the woman down, and noted the flush returning to her cheeks. Her fever had cooled breath more even now. Doc Harlan, thin and sharp-eyed, smelled faintly of whiskey, but wasted no time. With brisk efficiency, he examined her. Exhausted, dehydrated, he concluded, but she'll mend fine with rest and water. Leave her here tonight, I'll see she's tended. Eli felt a tug of reluctance, though he couldn't explain why. Something in her went beyond beauty or mystery. He remembered her voice commanding the Serpent, and something inside him had shifted like a long-locked door thrown wide. "I'll pay for her care," he heard himself say, "and I'll return tomorrow." Doc Harlan nodded. "As you wish, but don't expect her to linger. Women like her rarely stay put in a place like this." Stepping into the cooling evening, Eli turned the words over. Women like her. What did the old doctor mean? And why did those words stir such an ache of loss deep in his chest? What did Doc Harlan know about her that Eli Boone did not? And why had the old man's words left him with such a hollow ache? He led Copper to the livery stable, saw her given fresh hay and oats for the night. The stable keeper, Clyde Murphy, one-armed from a mining cave-in gray, and weathered eyed him with curiosity. "Heard you took a woman to see Doc Harlan," Clyde said without a trace of preamble. "Indian gal dressed in hides. Pretty from what folks are whispering." "Word runs fast in a place like this," Eli answered carefully. "Faster than you might want." Clyde chewed on a straw gaze, steady. "Best be cautious, friend. Some in this town don't take kindly to a white man keepin' close company with a native woman. Could bring you grief." Eli's jaw tightened. The warning sparked a flash of anger, though he knew Clyde meant no harm. "I'll keep it in mind," he said. As he walked toward his boarding house, thoughts of the canyon clawed their way back. The way she had commanded that serpent to turn. The words she'd spoken about saving his life. That strange shift inside him, like something buried, had suddenly stirred. He had always lived by the tangible, the things a man could hold or shoot or rope. The war had taught him life was cruel chance survival, a matter of reflex and grit. No room left for dreams or superstition. Yet lying in that narrow bed as tombstones settled into the night, Eli found his mind circling around fate, destiny, and the crooked trails that sometimes led a man exactly where he was meant to be. Tomorrow he'd return to the doctor's office. He told himself it was simple decency, one soul's duty to another. But deep down he knew better. Something had begun in that canyon, and he was restless to see where it led. For the first time in years, Eli Boone was eager for what came next. Dawn crawled too slow for his weary mind. He tossed through the night, haunted by yellow eyes and glowing tattoos. Each time he closed his own, he heard that voice again, ancient, resonant speaking words that rattled his very bones. He dressed before the sun broke the ridges, pulling on his worn vest, buckling his gun belt with ritual precision. The Colt felt heavier at his hip, as though yesterday's fight had changed its very weight. The boarding house was quiet as he moved down the stairs, boots creaking. Nora Henderson, keeper of the place, was already at her stove fixing breakfast, but she barely looked up. In her experience, men like Eli Boone came and went by their own rules. The morning air carried a chill that would soon burn away, but for now, it braced him. Tombstones stirred awake around him, storekeepers sweeping their boardwalks, horses stamping at hitch rails, men fortifying themselves with coffee and whiskey. Eli walked slower than usual toward Harlan's door, reluctant to break the spell that Canyon had cast. What if she was gone, What if he'd imagined it all a mirage, born of heat and thirst? What if Doc Harlan only stared at him blankly, asking what woman he meant? But she was there. Lena Greywolf, sitting upright in the narrow bed. Real as the desert itself, mysterious as the night sky. She wore a clean white nightgown in place of her torn dress, and somehow it only heightened the wildness in her. Her black hair tumbled loose over her shoulders, and her dark eyes never left him as he stepped inside. "You came back," she said softly, as though she hadn't been sure he would. "I said I would." Eli tugged his hat off, awkward under her gaze. "How are you feeling better?" "Much better." She swung her legs over the bed, feet small yet calloused from a lifetime on rough earth. "The doctor says I can leave when I choose." "And where will you go?" His words hung between them heavier than he intended. She tilted her head, studying him as if she could read secrets written on his face. "That depends," she said at last, "on whether you believe in fate." Before Eli could speak, Doc Harlan appeared more sober than last night and nodded to him before turning to her. "Miss, I've asked around. There are townsfolk who may know of your people. If you'd like, I can arrange for you to meet them." She shook her head gently. "That won't be needed, Doctor. I know who I am and where I come from. The question isn't where I've been, it's where I'm bound." Her eyes found Eli's again, and that same stirring rose inside him, the feeling of something long asleep now waking. Doc Harlan cleared his throat politely. "Well then, my part here is finished," Doc Harlan said at last. "Miss, you may leave whenever you feel ready. Mr. Boone has already settled what was owed." Once the doctor stepped out, the woman drifted to the small window overlooking the street. Her movements flowed with quiet grace like a creek sliding over stone. Eli Boone couldn't help but wonder how someone so delicate could have survived the crushing coils of that monstrous serpent. "My name is Lena Greywolf," she said without turning. "It means eternal blossom in my people's tongue." "Eli Boone," he answered, though deep down he suspected she already knew. "You saved my life yesterday, Eli Boone. Among my people that binds us, you are tied to me now, as I am to you." A shiver passed through him that had nothing to do with the morning chill. "I don't understand." She turned then, the sunlight spilling across her tattoos, making them glimmer as if lit from within. They weren't mere decorations. He realized they told stories, carried meaning far beyond beauty. "That serpent wasn't just any beast," Lena said softly. "It was ancient, older than this town, older than the white man's step on this land. My grandmother spoke of such beings, creatures that slip between this world and the spirit realm." "That's impossible," Eli muttered, though the words rang hollow even as he spoke them. He had seen the intelligence in those yellow eyes. He had seen it obey her. "Is it?" Lena stepped closer. Her scent was a blend of sage wildflowers and something he couldn't name. "You saw me speak to it. You saw it yield. Tell me, Eli Boone, what do you believe is possible?" His thoughts wandered back to the war nights when death had hovered inches away, only for him to wake and find himself still breathing. Bullets that passed so close he felt their heat. Moments when something outside himself seemed to guide his hand. "I believe," he said slowly, "there's more in this world than most folks are willing to admit." A smile touched her lips, softening her face, stripping away some of its mystery and danger. She looked younger now, more human, more vulnerable. "The snake came for me because of what I carry," she continued. "A gift or a curse. I can speak with the old spirits, walk between worlds. Not many can, and it carries a price." "What price?" "Loneliness," she whispered. "We are bridges between two worlds, but never belong to either." Eli thought of his own drifting years wandering from camp to camp, never letting himself be tied down. He had called it freedom. Maybe it had only been solitude. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "Because when you chose to face that creature instead of fleeing, something shifted. The spirits spoke to me as I drifted into darkness. They showed me a path I'd never seen, a destiny I hadn't imagined." She reached for her torn dress, pulling something from its folds. A turquoise stone, rough and ancient, the size of a silver dollar. Its carved symbols shimmered and shifted in the morning light. "This belonged to my grandmother, and to hers before her, passed down for generations beyond counting. It reveals the true path when the time comes." Lena held the stone to the window. Its symbols danced with life, and Eli felt himself drawn closer. "What does it show you?" he asked, before he could stop himself. Two trails joining into one. A man haunted by ghosts of war and a woman bound to the spirits. Together they may find what neither could alone. The turquoise pulsed with inner fire. Eli swore he saw visions in its depths. A ranch house in a valley he didn't know, children playing in a yard, an old woman teaching stories woven into cloth. "I see a future," Lena murmured, "where the walls between worlds become bridges, where fear turns to understanding, where two souls who thought they walked alone learn they were meant to walk together." The light faded. It was just a carved stone again, yet the images clung to Eli's mind so vividly he almost smelled wood smoke from that unseen hearth, heard the laughter of children unborn. "That's only a story," he said, though his voice betrayed him. "All futures begin as stories," Lena answered. "The question is, do we choose to make them real?" She tucked the turquoise away, gathering her few belongings. The deerskin could be mended. Her beaded moccasins, tough and decorated like stars, had survived unharmed. "Where will you go now?" Eli asked, though he suspected her answer. "That depends on you," she replied, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I could return to my people, live as a bridge between their world and the spirit world. It is an honorable life, but not the only one. What is the other? I could remain here in this place between old and new, with a man who knows there's more to courage than a gun. I could learn to build bridges instead of only crossing them." Her words lingered heavy in the room. Eli's mind raced with reasons it would fail, differences in their blood. Their cultures, the town's scorn, the hard truths of living with someone who defied everything he'd been taught. Yet he also thought of the emptiness that had trailed him for years, from battlefield to cattle drive to lonely desert trail. He thought of her standing fearless before that ancient serpent when most men would have fled. He kept seeing the turquoise vision, those glimpses of a life bathed in warmth, purpose, and belonging. "The folks in this town," Eli Boone began, "they may never understand." "The folks in this town," Lena Greywolf replied calmly, "aren't the ones living our lives. They've got their own trails to ride, their own choices to reckon with. We can only answer for our own." She was right, and he knew it. Too many years he'd let other people's judgment dictate his steps, fear of whispers keeping him alone. Maybe it was time to show a different kind of courage. "If you stayed," he asked carefully, "what would that look like?" "How would we live? Any way we choose," she answered. "There are ranches out here, crying out for steady hands, folks who understand the land and the stock. Settlements that need bridges between the first people and the newcomers. Men and women who can speak both languages and walk in both worlds. The possibilities, Eli Boone, are endless for those with the grit to seize them." Her words painted pictures in his mind. A small ranch tucked in a hidden valley, horses in the corral, cattle. Grazing, maybe even a family. A frontier trading post where her knowledge of her people's ways and his of white man's trade could build something new. A guide service for travelers wanting the real West, not the dime novel fantasy hawked back east. Each vision felt not only possible, but destined as if fate itself was reaching out with an open hand. "There is more," Lena said quietly. "Something I didn't tell you about yesterday." Eli's chest tightened. "What the Serpent didn't find me by chance. I went searching for it." He blinked. "You went looking for that devil. Why in God's name?" She turned back to the window, eyes on the street, yet clearly seeing farther. "Among my people, there are rites that mark the steps of life, trials that prove one's worth to guide others to stand as leader or healer. Facing the great Serpent is one such trial." "You mean you sought that beast on purpose?" I did, though I hadn't expected it to be so big, or so angry. A faint smile tugged her lips. My grandmother always said I bit off more than I could chew. Eli stared, struggling to reconcile this truth. She had deliberately sought a creature that could have ended her all for a spiritual trial. The courage in that was staggering. What was it meant to prove that I was ready to choose my own road instead of following the one tradition demanded? The Serpent stands for the old ways, the ancient powers that shaped our bond with the spirit world. To face it and survive means earning the right to forge new understandings. And you survived. We survived, she corrected softly. That's the lesson. The spirits never meant for me to face it alone. They sent you just as they sent me to you. Two souls meant to find one another, drawn by forces greater than us both. Her words settled over him like a blanket on a cold night. He had always believed his path was carved by his own hand, sheer will, and stubborn grit. But maybe other forces had been nudging him here all along, guiding him to this very moment. "So what happens now?" he asked. Lena turned from the window, her dark eyes carrying both hope and uncertainty. Now she said, "We decide, do we trust fate, or do we make our own?" Even as she spoke, Eli knew the answer had already been given the moment her scream split the desert and he chose to run toward it. Everything since had been the echo of that first decision. "Then we make our own fate," Eli said, holding out his hand. She studied it, weighing not just the gesture, but the whole of what it meant, stepping off her people's worn trail into something unknown and untested. Building a life with a man she had known barely 2 days, tied only by chance or destiny. When her warm hand slid into his calloused palm, Eli felt that same charge from the canyon like a circuit completed. Together, she agreed, and her smile carried the promise of sunrise after the longest night. An hour later, they left Doc Harlan's office. Lena, back in her mended deerskin, had gathered her few things. The sun had climbed high, burning away the desert's chill gilding tombstone's adobe walls in gold and amber. Eli had worked out a plan during their talk. South about 30 miles was a ranch owned by Joshua Brennan, a man who had once ridden beside him in the war. Brennan had written months before, saying he needed steady hands, offering good pay for work in country that could kill the unprepared. Eli had tossed the idea aside then. The thought of staying rooted of belonging somewhere had seemed impossible. But now, walking through Tombstone's dusty street with Lena at his side, the notion of settling down took on a different shine. Their first stop was the general store, where Eli laid down coin for supplies they'd need on the road south. Travel rations, cartridges, and a fresh canteen to replace the one lost in yesterday's chaos. The storekeeper, a wiry man with shifty eyes, studied Lena Greywolf with open suspicion, but kept his mouth shut. His wife, bustling behind the counter, leaned close to another customer, whispering words Eli Boone chose to ignore. At the livery, Clyde Murphy lent a hand, saddling Copper, and brought out a gentle mare named Sage for Lena to ride. The old-timer's knowing eyes lingered on them as they readied to leave, though his advice was simple, pointing out waterholes along the southern trail. "Brennan's a good man," Clyde remarked as he tugged at Lena's cinch. "Fair with his crew, and he don't dig too deep into a man's past. You could do worse than throwing in with him." As they rode out of Tombstone, Eli looked back just once. The town lay behind them, toy-sized, in the shimmering haze already blurring into heat and distance. Ahead stretched open country, mile after mile of promise, the horizon wide and beckoning. Lena rode beside him with the poise of one born to the saddle. Black hair streaming behind her like a banner. Beads and feathers woven through the strands caught the sun, giving her an otherworldly glow. Watching her, Eli felt a contentment he hadn't known in years. They pressed southward, the land growing rougher as the hours passed. Flat desert gave way to rolling hills patched with mesquite, and Palo Verde dry now, but lush during the summer rains. Mountains rose in the distance, purple silhouettes against a flawless sky, their snow-capped crowns holding firm against the spring sun. At midday, they rested the horses in the shade of a giant boulder. From her saddlebags, Lena drew a leather pouch and offered him strips of dried meat seasoned with herbs he couldn't place. The flavor was bold and earthy, unlike anything he had tasted. "Elk," she explained, "prepared the way my grandmother taught me. Food should feed the spirit, as well as the body." They ate in easy silence, and Eli found himself watching her profile stark against the desert's sweep. She seemed timeless, belonging not just to this land, but to this strange moment when two worlds collided and reshaped one another. She wasn't only a bridge, as she had claimed. She was something new altogether. "Tell me about your family," he asked at last. She stayed quiet so long he thought she might never answer. When she finally spoke, sorrow lay heavy in her voice. "My parents died when I was 12. Fever swept through our village, taking elders and children alike. My grandmother raised me, taught me the old ways, prepared me for the burden of my gift." "Your gift," Eli echoed. "The power to speak with spirits, among other things." She turned her gaze on him. "Would it frighten you, knowing I sometimes see paths ahead? Not clearly, only glimpses, but enough to guide when choices matter most." Eli weighed her words. 2 days ago, he'd have laughed them off as superstition. But he had seen her command that ancient serpent with nothing but her voice. He had seen her tattoos flare with their own light. And he had witnessed the vision inside that turquoise stone. "I reckon," he said slowly, "I'd be more afraid if you couldn't see. At least this way we're not walking blind." Her smile softened, some of the sadness lifting. "You're not what I expected when the spirits showed me the man who would change my trail. And what did you expect? Someone harder, closed off to mystery. Most white men I've met cling to what they can weigh and measure." Eli thought of the war, how it had taught him to bury feeling, to focus only on survival. That armor had kept him alive, but had also cut him off from the deeper currents of life. Maybe meeting Lena was about more than companionship. Maybe it was about reclaiming parts of himself long buried. "The war changed me," he admitted, "made me wary of anything that might turn out to be an illusion. And now, I'm starting to believe some illusions might be truer than what folks call facts." They set out again in the heat of the afternoon, following a rutted trail that wound between ridges and dry creeks. The sun bore down the air, wavering like a furnace. Yet Eli minded it less, as though Lena's presence softened even the desert's cruelty. She told him stories of her people tales, so old they blurred the line between history and legend. Spirits who walked as men sacred places where the veil between worlds grew thin, heroes who crossed into death itself to bring back wisdom. In turn, he spoke of his childhood on a Missouri farm before the war shattered it, of friends buried on battlefields few remembered, of dreams he once held of land family and belonging dreams he'd thought forever lost until now. Late in the day, they topped a ridge and looked down into a valley. The Brennan Ranch spread wide below, larger than Eli had imagined. A stout adobe and timber house anchored the place, corrals and outbuildings sprawling around it. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures watered by a clear-running creek, steady even in drought. "It looks peaceful," Lena murmured, her voice carrying a wistfulness that made Eli glance at her, searching her face. "Second thoughts, Eli," Boone asked quietly. "Not about you," Lena Greywolf said quickly, "but about the life we're stepping into. I've never lived among settlers before, never tried to belong in their world. What if I can't? What if the distance between us is too wide to cross?" Eli drew Copper to a halt and reached for her hand. "Then we'll carve out our own world," he said firmly. "A place between yours and mine, where both can take root." The simple vow steadied her. When they rode down into the valley, her back was straighter, her gaze clear. Joshua Brennan was much as Eli remembered from their army days, solid gray at the temples, laugh lines etched deep around eyes that spoke of a man content with his lot. He greeted Eli with warmth and offered Lena the kind of courtesy that came from years of dealing fairly with folks of all kinds. "I can always use good hands," Brennan said, after Eli explained their situation in careful words. "The work's honest, the pay is fair. I've got quarters for married couples, and nobody pries so long as the work gets done." That evening, they sat on the porch, while Margaret Brennan prepared a supper, rich with the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread. The sun slid behind the western peak sky, burning with orange and violet, until it seemed the whole world was aflame. Lena had been polite through dinner, answering Margaret's questions with courtesy, but offering little of herself. Now, as the stars blinked into the deepening sky, Eli felt the tension rolling off her like heat from a forge. "What's on your mind?" he asked, low, careful that their hosts could not overhear. "This is not my world," she whispered. "They're kind, but to them I'm something curious, something exotic. Kindness doesn't last. Soon enough it shifts to suspicion, to judgment, and then I'll no longer belong." Before Eli could answer, a strange sound drifted out of the night, a deep rhythmic rumble rising from the ground, as if something massive moved beneath their feet. Brennan shot to his feet, snatching the rifle from the porch rail. What in blazes? The sound came again, closer this time. The planks under Eli's boots trembled with it. Whatever it was huge, and it was coming for them. Lena stood slowly, her face pale under the starlight. "It followed us," she whispered, terror threading her voice. What followed us Eli demanded, though he already knew. The serpent from the canyon. Somehow it had tracked them across 30 miles of desert, guided by forces no man could name. Inside, Brennan barked soldier's instinct, taking command. "Margaret, fetch the ammunition, boys," he hollered, and ranch hands spilled out of the bunkhouse, weapons in hand, faces confused. But Lena shook her head. "No, if we hide it will only feed its fury. This is my trial, my burden to carry." The rumble deepened, circling the ranch like a wolf at the edge of firelight. Cattle bawled in fear, horses screamed in their stalls. "Lena, that thing nearly killed you once," Eli warned. "And it would have if not for you." She turned, and in the starlight her tattoos glowed with the same fire Eli had seen in the canyon. "But this time is different. This time I am not alone." From her dress, she drew the turquoise stone. Its carved symbols blazed with a blue-white brilliance too fierce to look at. The ground-shaking rumble stopped, leaving a silence so heavy Eli could hear his own heartbeat hammering in his ears. Then from beyond the corral came the scrape of scales dragging earth. The sound grew louder, steady, deliberate. "What does it want?" Brennan asked, his voice tight. "It wants to finish what was begun," Lena answered, lifting the glowing stone. The light spilled out like a second sun pushing back the night. The trial was left unfinished. Until it is completed, neither of us can move forward. Out of the shadows slid the great serpent, larger than Eli remembered. Its body was thick as a cottonwood trunk, stretching into the dark for 50 feet or more. Its head rose as high as a mounted rider, weaving side to side. Those awful yellow eyes burning with hunger. But its approach was different this time, slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if it understood that tonight's encounter would follow older laws. Lena stepped off the porch, her stride measured. The turquoise blazed brighter with each pace until the ranch yard glowed like high noon. Behind her, Eli heard Brennan's men shifting rifles ready but unsure. "This is how it must be," Lena called back, her voice steady. "The trial must be finished. No weapons, no interference. Only will and understanding." She stopped 20 feet away. The serpent reared to its full height, towering like a monument to ancient power-forked tongue tasting the air. Eli swore he saw a mind working behind those yellow lantern eyes. This was more than a beast. It was something far older, a presence from a world that brushed against their own. Lena began to speak in her native tongue, her voice strong, carrying across the hushed ranch yard. The words Lena Greywolf spoke rose and fell like a chant, steady and melodic, carrying the weight of something older than prayer. As her voice flowed, the carvings in the turquoise stone began to shift, weaving into new shapes that told a tale in a tongue older than men. The great serpent listened, its massive head swaying in rhythm, as if answering a music only it could hear. From time to time it gave a low rumble, the sound rolling through the earth beneath their feet, a reply to her call. Watching them, Eli Boone realized this wasn't a battle at all. It was a reckoning. A negotiation between two worlds. Minutes stretched like hours as the strange dialogue unfolded. At last, Lena lifted the glowing stone high, its light spilling over them both, wrapping woman and beast alike in a cocoon of blinding fire. When she spoke again, her tone rang with authority that set the air to vibrating. The serpent lowered its massive head until its eyes met hers, and for one eternal heartbeat they were locked together, spirit to spirit. Then, like distant thunder rolling away, the creature began to retreat, sliding back into the night it had come from. But before its bulk vanished completely, it paused. Its head swung toward Eli, and those terrible yellow eyes burned into him with a judgment that pierced bone and soul alike. And then a voice not heard, but felt, spoke inside his mind. "She is yours to guard, as you are hers to guide. Protect what is given, for the trail ahead holds wonders you cannot yet imagine." And then it was gone. Only the deep furrows gouged in the earth proved that any of it, had ever been real. Lena faltered, and Eli rushed forward, catching her against his chest. The turquoise had gone dark in her hand, just a stone again, but her tattoos still pulsed faintly with her heartbeat. "It is done," she whispered against him. "The trial is finished, the debt is paid. Now we are free to choose our own path." Eli held her close, as tremors shivered through her body, the last of that unearthly power bleeding away. Slowly the ranch yard filled again with the ordinary sounds of night cattle, settling horses snorting the cry of a coyote drifting across the desert. "What did it say to you?" Brennan asked finally, awe and fear tangled in his voice. "When it looked at you, I swear it was speaking." Eli met his gaze across the dark yard. "It said some bonds run deeper than the things that divide us, that the future belongs to those brave enough to build bridges instead of walls. It wasn't word for word, but it was truth enough. Some messages were too big to share outright with those who hadn't walked through fire to hear them." Margaret Brennan stepped to her husband's side, pale but steady. "Well then," she said briskly, "I suppose it's time we built a few bridges of our own. Lena, dear, you look worn through. Let me show you to your quarters, and tomorrow we'll find work that suits you." As the two women walked toward the house, Eli and Brennan stood side by side in the yard, staring into the darkness where the serpent had disappeared. "That wasn't any ordinary snake," Brennan muttered. "No," Eli answered. "And she isn't any ordinary woman." Brennan nodded slowly, as though confirming a suspicion. "Good. Ordinary never built a damn thing worth keeping. Ordinary never changed a world. The weeks that followed carried them into ranch life with surprising ease. Eli worked the stock, using every hard-won skill from his wandering years to sharpen the operation. Lena found her place with Margaret, helping build trade with nearby tribes, translating bridging two worlds for the good of all. The ranch hands accepted them without fuss. Out here, survival weighed more than prejudice. If Lena sometimes knew things no one had told her, or if Eli had a knack for finding strays or reading weather signs, these things were counted as blessings, not curses. At dusk, they would sit on the porch of their small cabin, watching the sun bleed out behind the mountains, talking of what lay ahead. Lena taught him words in her tongue, and he guided her through the tangle of white man's dealings. Together they were weaving something new, a life drawn from both worlds. 3 months later, Lena came to him with news that set his heart hammering with equal parts fear and joy. She was carrying his child, a life born of two legacies, who would walk between worlds as naturally as breathing, bearing both their burdens and their gifts. "Are you afraid?" Lena Greywolf asked, studying his face with searching eyes. Eli Boone weighed the truth. Fear crowded his mind, the thought of a child caught between two worlds accepted fully by neither, the weight of fatherhood he had never imagined carrying, the danger of raising a family on a frontier that was still untamed and unpredictable. Yet greater than every doubt was a feeling he had never known before, a sense of rightness, as if every mile of wandering, every lonely night had been leading him to this very moment. "Yes," he said honestly, "but not enough to turn me away from it." Her lips curved into a smile as she guided his hand to rest gently over the life growing inside her. "Good. Fear keeps us cautious, but it should never rob us of the gifts life places in our hands." They sat together in the twilight, the first stars winking awake above them, and Eli's thoughts turned to destiny and choice, and the strange trails that carried a man to exactly where he belonged. He had come to Arizona to outrun his past, to vanish. Instead, he had found Lena, and in her, he had found himself again. Not the shattered soldier, not the drifting loner, but someone new. Someone who could face tomorrow with hope, who could believe in the promise of building something lasting and good. The serpent had been right, he realized. Their road together was leading to wonders beyond anything he had once imagined. Not thunderous miracles, but the quiet kind, the miracles of love, of kin, of belonging. Two souls choosing to trust, to honor both of their heritages while shaping something entirely new. As though reading his heart, Lena squeezed his hand softly. "No regrets?" she asked. Eli looked at her face in the starlight, the woman who had shattered his doubts and shown him truths he had never dared believe. The woman who proved that bonds could be stronger than differences, and that the future belonged to those willing to build bridges instead of walls. None, he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being, not a single one. In the distance, a coyote called out its cry, carrying across the desert, like a blessing, as if the land itself celebrated their choice. Together, they sat, listening to the chorus of night around their new home, two souls who had found their place in the world by finding each other. The Serpent's gift had been greater than either had first understood, not merely the closing of a trial or the settling of old laws, but the wisdom to see that some encounters were meant to change everything, that sometimes saving another meant saving yourself, that certain choices once made opened doors to futures a man had never dreamed possible. And in a small cabin on an Arizona ranch beneath a sky that had watched over countless generations, two wanderers at last came home. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.